The neighborhood looked calm that morning, but inside the HOA office, a storm was brewing. The president, a woman named Marcia, had been bragging for weeks that she could take my home whenever she wanted. She thought I was just another quiet homeowner who wouldn't fight back. What she didn't know was that I carried a responsibility far greater than any HOA board seat. I was a federal judge. I didn't just understand the law, I lived it every single day. When I found false notices taped to my door, threatening fines and foreclosure, I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate move to steal what was mine. Marcia thought she could corner me with her power. But power built on lies collapses fast. And the moment I revealed who I was, the entire HOA froze like statues. The truth was about to shake their world apart. Asterisk eyes and a sharper tongue. Every time I saw her walking the block with her clipboard, I noticed how people either avoided her gaze or gave her nervous smiles. She had the air of someone who thrived on control, someone who enjoyed making others squirm. At first I dismissed her as one of those overly involved homeowners who took neighborhood rules too seriously. Little did I know how far she was willing to go. The first letter came in the middle of spring. It was neatly folded, stuffed into my mailbox, and stamped with the HOA seal. The words were bold, notice of violation. My heart sank for a moment, thinking I had overlooked something. I unfolded the paper and read that my lawn was unacceptable in appearance and needed immediate mowing, or I would be fined $100. I stared at it in disbelief. I had just mowed my grass 2 days earlier. The blades were trimmed evenly, the edges neat, and the yard looked as presentable as any other in the neighborhood. I tossed the letter on the counter, shaking my head. Mistakes happen, I thought. Maybe the inspector wrote the wrong house number. But the following week, another letter came, this time accusing me of having an unapproved mailbox color. According to the paper, my mailbox should have been painted HOA-approved gray, but mine was a standard black one, the same as at least half the homes on my street. This time, I felt irritation rising in my chest. I had seen these tactics before: false claims, twisted rules, intimidation. They reminded me of defendants in my courtroom who tried to bend the law to their will. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to clear things up. The community center was packed with folding chairs, neighbors sitting stiffly as Marcia stood at the podium, shuffling papers and speaking in a tone that made her sound like a school principal scolding children. When it was my turn to raise the issue, I calmly explained the letters I had received and asked for clarification. Marcia smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. What does the kind predators give when they smell weakness? Oh, Judge Harrison, she said, drawing out my last name like she was savoring it. We simply have to maintain standards here. If you're receiving notices, it's because you're not in compliance. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. I noticed the way she emphasized my title, Judge, as if she already knew who I was and wanted to remind everyone that even a federal judge could be put in his place by the HOA. I kept my voice, even professional. My lawn is cut, and my mailbox is the same color as most in this neighborhood. Could it be an error? I asked. Marcia's eyes gleamed. The board doesn't make errors, she replied firmly. Perhaps you should spend less time questioning us and more time following the rules. That meeting told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about my grass or mailbox. It was about her. She wanted to show me, and everyone else, that her authority was absolute. Over the next month, the letters multiplied. Some were laughable claims, that I had trash cans visible on non-pickup days. Accusations that my shutters weren't the right shade of white. Others were more serious, threatening, escalating fines, and even foreclosure if I didn't comply. One Saturday morning, as I stood on my porch sipping coffee, I noticed two men walking across my yard with clipboards. They didn't knock or introduce themselves. They simply scribbled notes, pointed at my siding, and shook their heads as if they had found serious violations. I stepped forward. Can I help you? I asked, my tone calm but direct. One of them, a younger man with a red cap, looked up nervously. We're inspectors for the HOA. Do you have identification? I asked. He hesitated before mumbling. No, ma'am. We don't carry badges, just doing our job. I watched them leave, my jaw tight. Inspectors without ID, wandering uninvited across my property. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was a setup. That night, I opened a fresh folder and began organizing the evidence. Every notice, every letter, every photograph of my perfectly manicured lawn went inside. I scanned documents, time-stamped photos, and wrote down details of the so-called inspections. Years of courtroom experience had trained me to see patterns, and I saw one forming clearly. Marcia wanted my house. The whispers in the neighborhood confirmed it. At the grocery store, a woman who lived 2 streets over leaned close and whispered, "Be careful. Marcia's been talking about giving her son a place on your block." Another neighbor, an older man who walked his dog past my house, muttered, "She's done this before. People move out because they get tired of fighting. Don't let her win." The more I heard, the clearer the picture became. Marcia had a history of using her position to bully homeowners into submission. Some had paid thousands in bogus fines just to keep their peace. Others had sold their homes under pressure, leaving the neighborhood quietly while Marcia bragged about her victories. It was abuse of power, plain and simple, But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't like the others. I had spent my entire career dealing with people who thought they could twist the system to suit themselves. Criminals, corporations, corrupt officials. I had seen them all, and each time, the law had been my weapon. One evening, I sat on my porch and watched the sun dip below the trees. The air was warm, cicadas buzzing in the distance, and the street was quiet. But inside me, there was a storm. I thought about the irony of it all. I had come here to escape the courtroom, to find rest. Yet the law had followed me home. Marcia thought she was dealing with an ordinary homeowner she could intimidate. She didn't know she had stepped onto the wrong battlefield. What she was doing wasn't just petty, it was criminal. Fraud, harassment, extortion, all words I had used to sentence people to prison. Now those same words applied to her. As I closed the folder filled with her lies, I made a silent promise. I wouldn't just fight back, I would expose her. She had built her little empire on fear, but fear only works until someone stands up to it. And I was ready to be that someone. The days that followed carried a strange weight, as if the air in the neighborhood had thickened. Each time I drove through the gates, I noticed eyes watching me. Some neighbors waved nervously, others avoided my gaze, and a few offered apologetic smiles as if to say they knew what was happening but didn't dare get involved. I had seen fear like that before, in courtrooms, victims too afraid to speak, witnesses silenced by threats. That same fear now lingered in the straits of what was supposed to be my safe haven. Marcia didn't waste any time. Another letter came, this one with bold red ink at the top. Final warning, foreclosure imminent. The words were so absurd, I almost laughed. Imminent foreclosure. Over what? My mailbox color, my grass height. But when I looked closer, I realized she was fabricating numbers. The letter listed thousands of dollars in supposed unpaid fines, stacked one after another, each tied to false violations I had already disproven to myself. It was a carefully designed illusion. Drown the homeowner in paperwork until they break. I set the letter down, my hands steady. I had handled worse than this. Still, I couldn't ignore the danger. If I were an ordinary homeowner without a background in law, I might have believed her threats. That thought made me angrier than anything else. How many people had she pushed out of this neighborhood using the same tactics? How many families had packed their bags, thinking they had no choice but to leave? I decided to play along for now. If Marcia thought I was intimidated, she would keep pressing, and every move she made would hand me more evidence. I already had a thick folder, but I needed a mountain of proof, enough to bury her abuse once and for all. A week later, I attended another HOA meeting. The room buzzed with chatter as residents shuffled into their seats. Marcia stood at the front, again, her clipboard in hand, her chin raised high. Her board members sat beside her like obedient guards, nodding at her every word. When she saw me enter, her smile spread, smug and satisfied, as though she had already won. The meeting began with minor issues: someone's dog barking at night, complaints about pool hours, discussions about repainting the tennis court fence, but eventually Marcia's voice sharpened. Next on the agenda, she announced, the matter of Mr. Harrison's continued noncompliance with HOA standards. Heads turned in my direction. A hush settled over the room. She continued, her tone dripping with authority. Despite repeated warnings, Mr. Harrison has failed to bring his property into compliance. The board has determined that fines will continue to accrue, and foreclosure proceedings may begin if this matter isn't resolved within 30 days. Theatrics. Pure theatrics. She wanted me humiliated in front of the neighbors. She wanted them to see me as an example. I raised my hand calmly. Madam President, may I respond? She hesitated, her eyes narrowing, but nodded. Go ahead. I stood, adjusting my jacket, and spoke evenly, my voice steady but firm. I've received your letters, I've reviewed your claims, and I've documented everything. My lawn is cut, my mailbox is standard, my trash cans are placed exactly where the bylaws require them to be. Your violations are not only baseless, they're fabricated. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Marcia's lips tightened. Mr. Harrison, she said coldly, the board's decisions are final. If you don't like them, perhaps this isn't the community for you. That sentence revealed more than she intended. It wasn't about rules or compliance. It was about control, about forcing me out. I saw it in the way her eyes flickered toward her board members, seeking approval. I'll keep that in mind, I replied, then sat down. My calmness seemed to irritate her more than any angry outburst would have. After the meeting, a man I hadn't spoken to before approached me outside. He was in his 60s, with gray hair and tired eyes, and he glanced around nervously before leaning closer. You're not the first, he whispered. She did this to the Bakers 2 years ago. Pushed him out over some nonsense about fence height. They lost thousands when they sold. My advice? Get out while you can. I looked him in the eye. Thank you for the warning. But I don't scare. Easy, he sighed, shaking his head. Just be careful. She plays dirty. His words stayed with me that night as I sat at my desk, reviewing the bylaws of the HOA. Every line, every clause. I read like a judge preparing for trial. And that's exactly what it was at trial. Marcia was the defendant, and I was building the case. I highlighted contradictions, underlined vague language, and flagged rules she herself had violated. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. The HOA wasn't being run as a community association. It was being run as Marsha's personal kingdom. A few days later, I noticed something strange. A white SUV parked across from my house, engine idling, 2 people inside. They sat there for nearly an hour, pretending to check their phones, occasionally pointing toward my yard. I walked out casually, pretending to water the plants, and watched them squirm. Eventually, the SUV drove away. The intimidation was getting sloppy. The next morning, another letter appeared. This one was more aggressive than the others. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action and property seizure. I chuckled. Property seizure. She didn't have the authority, not even close. But I realized her strategy: scare tactics. Stack enough of them together, and most people would fold. Instead of responding directly, I started documenting everything in greater detail. I bought a small camera and installed it above my front door, another one in my backyard. If Marsha or her inspector stepped onto my property again without permission, I would have footage. I also began recording my HOA meetings on my phone, discreetly capturing her threats. Every word, every lie, every smug declaration, I collected them all. By the second week, my folder had turned into a binder, neatly organized, tabbed, and ready. Evidence of a power-hungry president abusing her position. But I knew evidence alone wasn't enough. I had to make her reveal her true intentions in a way that couldn't be denied. She needed to say, in front of witnesses, what she really wanted, and I had a plan for that. I decided to push her buttons. At the next meeting, when she tried to bring up my non-compliance again, I interrupted with a question. Madam President, why is it that only certain homeowners seem to be targeted for these violations? Why are half the mailboxes in this neighborhood black, yet I'm the only one being fined for it? Gasps echoed around the room. Several neighbors nodded quietly, confirming the truth. Marsha's face flushed. This is not about anyone else, she snapped. This is about your failure to follow the rules. Or, I said smoothly, is it about something else? Perhaps about wanting my property? Her jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but quickly caught herself. I saw the flicker of rage in her eyes, the urge to say the words, but she swallowed them down. She wasn't ready to expose herself just yet, but she was close. Very close. That night, as I filed away the recording of the meeting, I realized I was walking a fine line. Push her too hard, and she might retreat, change tactics, or cover her tracks. Push her just enough, and she would explode. And when she did, the truth would spill out for everyone to hear. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the folder of evidence. Most people would have been exhausted, maybe even scared, by now. But I felt something else entirely: a steady determination. I had spent my life ensuring justice inside the courtroom. Now it was time to bring justice to my own doorstep. Marsha thought she held the power, but the truth was, she had already lost. She just didn't know it yet. The storm was no longer brewing, it was breaking. By the time the 3rd month of this ordeal began, the harassment had shifted from petty notices to outright threats. Marsha wasn't satisfied with letters anymore. She wanted a scene, something loud enough to scare me into folding. The strange thing was, the louder she became, the calmer I felt. I had faced murderers, criminals, and con men in my courtroom. Compared to them, Marsha was nothing but a bully with a clipboard. Still, I knew bullies could do real damage if left unchecked. One Friday morning, I found a large envelope taped to my front door. No postage, no return address. The seal read, "Notice of foreclosure." This time, the document was dressed up to look official. It had bold fonts, legal-sounding language, and a fake signature at the bottom from someone claiming to be a community court officer. The problem was, no such position existed. It was a forgery, plain and simple. I carried the envelope inside, sat at my desk, and read every line carefully. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed real enough. The paper even had a watermark, the kind used to make something look official. But the grammar was sloppy, and the wording betrayed desperation. She was running out of tricks. Later that afternoon, I saw Marsha standing across the street, chatting with one of her board members. Every few seconds, her eyes flickered toward my house. She wanted me to see her. She wanted me to know she was watching. I simply raised the envelope in my hand, smiled politely, and walked back inside. I imagined the fury that must have sparked in her chest when she realized her scare tactics had failed again. But I also realized something important. She was escalating faster now. That meant she was close to slipping, to making the kind of mistake that couldn't be hidden. And when she did, I would be ready. 2 nights later, I was sitting in my living room reading when I heard voices outside. I stepped onto my porch quietly, keeping to the shadows. Down the street, near the community park, I saw a group of people gathered in a circle. At the center stood Marsha, waving her hands like a preacher. I couldn't hear every word, but phrases carried on the night air: noncompliance, disrespect, bad example. She was talking about me, trying to rally the neighbors against me. It didn't surprise me. Divide and conquer was a tactic as old as time. If she could make me look like the villain, maybe she thought the others would turn on me, leaving me isolated. What she didn't realize was that some neighbors had already begun quietly supporting me. After the last HOA meeting, 2 families had slipped me notes, thanking me for speaking up. They were tired of her bullying too, but they lacked the strength or maybe the resources to fight back. The next morning, I found a smaller envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten note, unsigned. She's planning something big. Be careful. My instincts told me it was genuine. Someone on the inside had grown uneasy. I didn't have to wait long to find out what something big meant. That same week, I returned home from work to find 2 men standing in my driveway. They wore cheap suits and carried clipboards, pretending to look official. One of them raised a hand as I stepped out of my car. "Mr. Harrison?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "We're here on behalf of the HOA. You need to vacate this property immediately. It's under foreclosure." I studied them for a moment. Their clothes were wrinkled, their shoes scuffed, and neither of them carried proper identification. They were imposters, nothing more than hired actors. "Do you have legal documents?" I asked calmly. The taller one shifted uncomfortably. "We have this," he said, handing me another copy of the fake foreclosure notice. I glanced at it, then folded it neatly. "Gentlemen, let me make something clear. What you're doing right now is trespassing. If you don't leave my property within the next 60 seconds, I'll call the police. And unlike you, when the police show up, they'll have real authority." Their bravado evaporated instantly. They mumbled something about just following orders and hurried back to their car. I watched them drive away, the engine sputtering as if even the car knew it didn't belong in this neighborhood. That night, I added the new documents to my binder, labeling them carefully. Forged foreclosure notices, false representatives, harassment, escalating to direct confrontation. The case was building itself. Still, I needed Marcia to overplay her hand in front of witnesses. That was the key. Evidence on paper was strong, but words spoken aloud in a room full of people carried a weight that couldn't be denied. The opportunity came at the next HOA meeting. The room was packed, the tension thick. I noticed more neighbors than usual, many of them whispering as I entered. Marcia stood tall at the podium, her smile tight, her eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk circling prey. She wasted no time. "Before we begin with general business," she said, "I must address the ongoing situation with Mr. Harrison." Her voice was sharp, her tone laced with false authority. She held up a stack of papers, the same forged noticized, and waved them in the air. "This homeowner has repeatedly refused to comply with our bylaws. His violations are numerous. His fines have gone unpaid, and his property is now subject to foreclosure." Gasps echoed through the room. Some neighbors looked at me, wide-eyed, unsure what to believe. That was exactly what she wanted. Fear, confusion, isolation. I stood slowly, buttoning my jacket. My voice was calm, steady. "Madam President, I must correct you. These documents are forgeries. They carry no legal authority, and the accusations you've made are not only false, they're defamatory." Her face reddened. "Are you calling me a liar?" I looked her directly in the eye. "Yes." The room erupted into whispers. For a moment, Marcia looked stunned, but then her fury took over. Her voice rose, sharp and uncontrolled. "You think your title means you're above us?" she shouted. "You think being a judge makes you untouchable? This is my community, and I decide who stays and who goes. If you don't like it, you can pack your things and leave. Otherwise, I'll make sure you regret ever moving here." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of someone's chair scraping against the floor. Several neighbors looked horrified. A few nodded, quietly, as if finally seeing the truth with their own eyes. I let the silence stretch before I spoke again. "Thank you, Madam President," I said evenly. "That's exactly what I needed to hear." I sat down, recording still running in my pocket. That night, as I reviewed the audio, I smiled for the first time in weeks. She had exposed herself, not just to me, but to the entire room. The mask had slipped, and the tyrant beneath had been revealed. Still, I knew the battle wasn't over. Cornered animals lash out hardest, and Marcia was cornered now. She wouldn't retreat quietly. No, she would fight with every dirty trick she had left. As I closed my binder and locked it away in my cabinet, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. She thought this was about property lines and mailbox colors. She thought she could scare me into leaving, but what she didn't realize was that this had never been about her rules. It was about justice. And justice, in the end, always finds its way to the truth. The neighborhood was quieter than usual in the days after that explosive HOA meeting. People avoided eye contact. Conversations dropped to whispers whenever I walked past, and yet I could sense a shift in the air. Marcia's furious outburst had left a crack in her armor, and the neighbors had seen it. For years she had ruled with intimidation and threats. But now, for the first time, people were questioning her authority. I could see it in their ease, a mixture of doubt, curiosity, and the faint beginnings of courage. Still, Marcia wasn't finished. That much I knew. She was the kind of person who doubled down when cornered, who would rather scorch the earth than admit defeat. Sure enough, a fresh wave of harassment soon followed. This time it wasn't just letters or fake notices, it was personal. One evening, I returned home to find graffiti scrawled on my garage door. "Get out, Judge." The letters were jagged, painted in red spray paint, dripping down like blood. For a moment I stood there, staring at the message, the quiet street eerily still. Whoever had done it wanted to send a clear signal. This was no longer just about HOA rules, it was war. I called the police. Not because I expected much to come of it, but because documentation was key. An officer arrived, took photos, and wrote up a report. He asked if I had any idea who might be responsible. I can guess, I said carefully. But for now, I'll let the evidence speak for itself. The officer gave me a knowing look before nodding. Keep everything documented. People like this usually hang themselves with their own rope. That night, as I scrubbed the paint from the garage, I felt no anger, only focus. Every new act of intimidation was another piece of the puzzle, another nail in Marcia's coffin. She didn't realize it yet, but she was building my case for me, step by step. The following week, Marcia escalated again. She posted a notice on the community bulletin board, claiming that I was a danger to the neighborhood and urging homeowners to demand my removal. The language was wild, accusing me of harassment, negligence, and even suggesting I had threatened board members. I tore the notice down and added it to my binder. Another piece of fabricated evidence that would come back to haunt her. What struck me most, though, was how some neighbors quietly approached me after reading it. A young couple, new to the community, knocked on my door one evening. Judge Harrison, the husband said nervously, "We don't believe what she's saying. We've seen how she treats people. Just don't give up. People are watching." Their words carried more weight than they realized. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the people who had been silenced by her threats, too afraid to stand up. If I backed down, her reign would continue. But if I stood firm, maybe others would find the courage to resist. A few nights later, the breaking point arrived. I was in my study when a loud knock rattled the front door. When I opened it, Marcia herself stood there, flanked by two of her board members. Her lips were pursed, her eyes blazing with fury. She didn't even wait for me to speak. "You've embarrassed me for the last time," she spat. "You think you can defy me? You think you're above the rules? This is my neighborhood, and I will take your house, whether you like it or not." Her board members shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. I stepped aside. "Why don't you come in?" The three of them entered cautiously, perhaps expecting me to lash out. Instead, I guided them to the dining table. On its polished surface sat my thick binder, neatly stacked with tabs and labels. "What is this?" Marcia sneered. "Evidence," I said simply. "Every letter, every fake notice, every forged document you've ever sent me. Records of your harassment. Video footage of your so-called inspectors trespassing on my property. Even audio recordings of your outburst at the last meeting." Her face paled, but she tried to recover. "You can't prove anything. The board has the final say." "Not quite," I replied. Slowly, I reached into the binder and pulled out my identification wallet. I laid it on the table and opened it, revealing the seal of the United States government. "You see, Marcia, I'm not just any homeowner. I'm a federal judge, and everything you've done isn't just a violation of HOA bylaws, it's criminal. Fraud, extortion, and harassment." The silence that followed was deafening. Her board members froze, their eyes wide as they stared at the id. One of them actually swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Marcia, for the first time since I'd met her, looked rattled. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her bravado had slipped, replaced by a flicker of fear. You're bluffing," she finally whispered. "Am I?" I asked calmly. "Do you want me to call the state attorney's office right now, or perhaps the FBI? Because I guarantee, once they see this binder, you won't be sitting on any board ever again. You'll be sitting in a courtroom, answering for every single thing you've done." Her board members shifted in their seats, clearly realizing they were in over their heads. One of them muttered, "Marcia, maybe we should talk about this," but she snapped at him, desperate to cling to the last shreds of her authority. "No, he's trying to scare us. He can't do anything." I leaned forward, my voice firm but measured. "That's where you're wrong. You thought I was just another homeowner you could bully? You thought you could take what you wanted because no one would stop you? But your power ends here. And the only person who should be scared in this room is you." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second stretching the tension tighter. Finally, Marcia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You'll regret crossing me." She stormed out, her board members trailing behind her, their faces pale and shaken. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding. The mask was off now. She knew who I was. The question was, what would she do next? Over the next few days, I got my answer. Marcia vanished from public view. She stopped attending board meetings, stopped walking the streets with her clipboard. Whispers swirled among the neighbors. Some said she was consulting lawyers. Others claimed she was trying to destroy evidence. Whatever the case, she had gone from being the queen of the neighborhood to a ghost hiding in her own home. Meanwhile, the neighbors began to thaw. People who had once avoided me now waved, some even stopping to chat. It was as if my confrontation with Marcia had given them permission to breathe again. A mother walking her children past my house one afternoon said quietly, "We've all been waiting for someone to stand up to her. Thank you, but I wasn't celebrating yet." Bullies like Marcia rarely went down without one last desperate strike, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that she still had something planned. The calm before the storm was always the most dangerous, so I prepared, I tightened my evidence, made extra copies of my binder, and sent one to a trusted colleague downtown. I upgraded my security cameras, double-checked the locks, and stayed alert. If Marcia wanted to try one last move, I would be ready. What she didn't realize, though, was that the final decision was no longer in her hands. She had already lost the moment she threatened to take my house in front of witnesses, the moment she forged legal documents, the moment she thought her arrogance could outrun the law. And soon enough, the law would come knocking at her door. The stillness of the neighborhood didn't last long. Marcia may have retreated after our confrontation, but retreating was not the same as surrendering. I knew her type too well. Proud, stubborn, addicted to control. For someone like her, admitting defeat was worse than punishment. And so, I wasn't surprised when I sensed the ripples of her next move spreading through the community. It started with rumors. Neighbors whispered that Marcia was gathering signatures to call an emergency HOA meeting. Some claimed she was telling people I had fabricated my credentials, that my claim of being a federal judge was nothing more than a lie to scare her. Others said she was talking to lawyers, preparing to sue me for defamation. On a rainy Thursday evening, I received confirmation. An official notice, stuffed into my mailbox, summoned the community to a special meeting in 3 days. The subject, the removal of Mr. Harrison for fraudulent misrepresentation. I read it twice, then tucked it into my binder. She was grasping at straws. Instead of backing down, she had chosen to gamble everything on one last desperate play. But what she didn't realize was that every false step she took only tightened the noose around her own neck. The night of the meeting arrived with a heavy sky, clouds hanging low as if even the weather knew the weight of what was coming. The community hall was packed. Neighbors filled every chair, some standing along the walls. The tension was palpable, the air thick with curiosity and unease. People had come not just to hear Marcia, but to see what I would do. Marcia stood at the front, flanked by her loyal board members, her face set in a mask of defiance. She raised her chin as she began. "Fellow homeowners," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. "We are here tonight to address the lies and deceit spread by Mr. Harrison. He has claimed to be a federal judge, when in fact he is nothing of the sort. He has slandered this board, insulted me personally, and undermined the integrity of our community. For these reasons, I call for his immediate removal from the neighborhood and the forfeiture of his property." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some looked shocked, others skeptical. A few shook their heads, clearly weary of Marcia's theatrics. I waited until she finished, then rose from my seat. Calmly, I walked to the front, binder in hand. My footsteps echoed in the silence as every eye turned toward me. "Neighbors," I began, my voice steady. "For too long, you have been ruled by fear. You've been threatened with fines, bullied with lies, and silenced by intimidation. But tonight, the truth will speak louder than fear." I opened the binder and began to lay documents on the table one by one. Here is a forged violation notice, signed by Marcia, demanding payment that was never authorized by law. Here's a video of her so-called inspectors trespassing on my property without cause. Here's a transcript of her threatening to seize my home, witnessed by her own board members. Marcia's face turned crimson. "This is nonsense," she shouted. "He's making it all up." I ignored her and pulled out my identification wallet. With deliberate precision, I held it up for everyone to see. "And here," I said, "is the truth she didn't want you to know. My name is Judge Daniel Harrison. I serve as a federal judge in the U.S. District Court. This is my official credential, authenticated and verified. You may verify it yourselves with the government registry if you wish." The room erupted into murmurs. Some leaned forward to see the ID, others whispered to their neighbors in shock. Marcia's board members looked as if the floor had just been pulled out from under them. Marcia, trembling now, tried to shout above the noise. "He's lying. He has to be lying." But the tide had turned. A neighbor stood up, a man in his 60s who had lived in the community for years. "Marcia, I've had enough. You fined me $500 for leaving my trash cans out an hour late. You threatened to put a lien on my house for it. And now, after seeing this," he pointed at my credential, "I believe him, not you." Others began to speak up. A woman in the back raised her voice. "You tried to evict me because my dog was too loud, even though you had no proof. We all know you've been abusing your power." One by one, voices rose. The quiet fear that had gripped the neighborhood for years was breaking, replaced by a wave of anger directed at Marcia. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but finding none. Even her own board members looked away, unwilling to defend her any longer. I stepped closer to her, my voice calm but resolute. "Marcia, your reign of intimidation ends tonight. You have violated the trust of this community. You have broken the law with your forgeries and threats, And as of tomorrow morning, the authorities will be receiving a complete record of your actions. You will answer for them in a court of law." Her bravado finally shattered. Her lips trembled, her hands clenched into fists, and for the first time, I saw true fear in her eyes. She sputtered, "You can't do this to me. I was just trying to keep order." "No," I replied softly. "You were trying to keep control." The room fell silent again, every pair of eyes watching as Marcia's world crumbled around her. Finally, one of her board members spoke up, his voice shaky. "Effective, immediately." I motioned to remove Marcia from her position as HOA president. The vote was swift and unanimous. Not a single hand rose in her defense. Marcia stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes glassy with disbelief. Then, without a word, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the hall. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing like the final gavel. In a courtroom, relief swept through the room like a gust of fresh air. Neighbors clapped, some even cheered. People shook my hand, thanked me, and for the first time since moving into that neighborhood, I saw genuine smiles on their faces. But the real ending came days later. When federal investigators arrived, they interviewed neighbors, collected my evidence, and confirmed what I already knew. Marcia's actions went beyond HOA misconduct. They were criminal. Charges of fraud, forgery, and harassment followed swiftly. She had built her power on lies, and now those lies had buried her. For the neighborhood, life slowly returned to normal. Without Marcia's shadow looming over them, people began to take pride in their homes again. Children played outside without fear of being told off for violating noise ordinances. Neighbors waved, smiled, and spoke freely. The weight had lifted. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, that same young couple who had once encouraged me stopped by. The husband grinned. "You know, Judge, you didn't just save your home, you saved all of ours too." I smiled back, humbled by the thought. "Sometimes justice isn't about the courtroom," I said quietly. "Sometimes it's about standing up when no one else will." And in that moment, I knew that while I had ended Marcia's grip on the community, I had also given my neighbors something far more valuable: freedom. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and comment your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Bright Reality, for more powerful, real-life inspired stories.